Miss Ellen Germain, welcome to Thessaloniki and to GRTimes.gr. Thank you for the opportunity to meet you and spend the day with you. I would like to begin by asking you about your role as the special envoy for Holocaust issues, as many people do not really know what this role is, what it's that you do, and why does the United States have a special envoy specifically dedicated to pursuing issues related to the Holocaust.
Well, first, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about what I do and why the State Department has a special envoy for Holocaust issues. I'm delighted to be in Greece and particularly in Thessaloniki to talk about these issues. So my office, the Office of the Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues, was established in 1999. And basically we describe our mission as seeking a measure of justice for Holocaust survivors and their heirs. And people often ask, what does that mean? And I like to say we have two areas that we work on. One is the area of restitution and compensation, and that is working with governments, encouraging governments to set up processes and methods for some manner of claims for Holocaust survivors and their heirs to submit claims for property that was seized by the Nazis during World War II. And many countries have set up processes for that because 47 countries in 2009 signed an agreement called the Terezin Declaration, which is a non-binding agreement, but just committed those countries to addressing the problem of illegally seized property by the Nazis. So that is one piece of what we do, and that is sort of more classic diplomacy and working with foreign governments to find equitable ways to address these issues and ways that take into consideration the current situation as well of people who may be living in those properties and so on. So it's complicated. The other piece that my office handles, and which is what I'm really here in Greece to focus on, is accurate commemoration and education about the Holocaust. And this is very important because particularly these days we are seeing a rise in anti-Semitism around the world, in the United States, in Europe, and a rise in Holocaust distortion and denial, particularly with the use of online tools. And so those are our main issues.
We have had the opportunity to spend the day with you as you visited various monuments and sites of the city, honoring the Jewish community, but also reminding the people of the city about the perils of the Holocaust. Can you please tell us more about your visit to Thessaloniki? What is the purpose of your visit and your first impressions?
Sure. Well, as I said, these are very important issues to the United States and to the State Department, which is why we have a whole office dedicated to Holocaust issues. And I'm here in Thessaloniki to talk to the Jewish community. I just completed a meeting with them. And I also met with the deputy mayor here to talk about commemoration and education, remembrance of the Holocaust, and how that's being done here in Thessaloniki, because of course, as you all know far better than I, this was the center of Jewish life in Greece before World War II. And the vast majority of the Jewish population of Thessaloniki were deported by the Nazis and murdered, most of them in Auschwitz-Birkenau. So I am here to talk about how Thessaloniki already commemorates the history of its Jewish population and what the plans are for the future. And I've been very impressed by the many plans that I've heard about for a new Holocaust museum here in Thessaloniki, plans to improve Liberty Square, to make it a memorial site. There's already a Holocaust memorial there, but so I've been very, very pleased and very interested to hear about all of the interest and commitment on the part of a whole range of people here.
In Thessaloniki, you know about, and you tell me about the central role the Jewish community had played in the history of the city. Do you think Americans know about the terrible legacy of the Greek Holocaust and the fact that a very vibrant community existed here for centuries?
Honestly, I don't think that Americans know enough about Thessaloniki and about its Jewish history. And for example, personally, until I came to Thessaloniki, I did not know about the Romaniot Jewish community here. And I did not know that it had been here in Thessaloniki for more than 2,000 years, which is a fascinating history and shows how deeply the Jewish history is part of Greek history. They are inextricably intertwined with each other. They are a part of each other.
Yes, Thessaloniki is now undertaking the important initiative of becoming the home of the Holocaust Museum of Greece. From your meetings and discussions, have you recognized progress in the endeavor, and do you see the United States Holocaust Museum entering some kind of a partnership with the museum for the establishment of common programs or sharing of best practices in educational programs?
So I've heard a lot about the plans for the new Holocaust Museum here in Thessaloniki, and it sounds I've seen pictures of the design, and it's all very impressive, and I am really going to be following with great interest as those plans become reality, and I think it's clear they have an excellent chance of becoming reality, because it sounds as if the city, the Jewish community are all determined to make this happen. But as is always true, a big project like this takes a long time. And as far as the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum goes, they are a great resource for sharing ideas and methods with other Holocaust museums around the world. They often do that. They often lend their expertise. And we at the State Department run programs where we do exchange programs bringing over museum curators, scholars, other experts to the United States to visit the Holocaust Museum in Washington and some of the other Holocaust museums in the United States. We have 16 major Holocaust museums in the United States. And so we bring educators, scholars, museum curators to the United States to share our experiences, share best practices, explain how American Holocaust museums educate their publics about the Holocaust and about human mass atrocities like that, so that we can all work to prevent them in the future.
Yes. Recently, about a month ago, we have seen the U.S. Consulate General here in Thessaloniki and the Embassy in Athens posting a campaign on their social media highlighting State Department employees who are descendants of Holocaust survivors. And of course, your secretary is the stepson of a Holocaust survivor. Those were powerful stories related to the International Day of Holocaust commemoration. What are some strategies for countries to organize events related to the Holocaust and awareness in the spotlight to ensure that memory is kept alive?
So we're very proud of that social media project. It was something that was actually initiated by my office with the cooperation of embassies and consulates around the world to find, as you said, people who are working in the State Department now whose parents or grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And these are our colleagues at the State Department talking about how that experience, their parents' experience, their grandparents' experience, helped them, motivated them to enter public service, to become diplomats, to serve their country. And so I think that one of the best ways to connect, especially the younger generation, with the experience of the Holocaust so that they can understand and learn from it is to hear from survivors who, of course, inevitably are becoming fewer and fewer in number, but also to hear from their peers, from someone whose parent or grandparent went through the Holocaust, because those second and third generation people have also been affected by it. And what we find is that's a very powerful tool for making the younger generation understand the horrors of the Holocaust and why we all have to work to prevent such things in the future. So education is key, and in the future, being able to show video testimonies of Holocaust survivors, but also, for example, some museums and organizations are now experimenting with holograms, with making three-dimensional holograms, sort of three-dimensional video pictures of Holocaust survivors, so that an audience of students in 20 years can actually interact with that hologram of a Holocaust survivor and ask the person questions. And it's not quite as good as speaking to a live human being, but it's an effective experience. So I think new technologies also have the opportunity to help us educate young people.
One last question of a more general nature, if I may. Mm-hmm. Do you see a rise in anti-Semitism in the United States and in the world? And not only anti-Semitism, but do you see efforts of Holocaust distortions and denial as the years pass and the memories fade? Is there something the political leaderships and perhaps educational leaders should be doing in order to address this issue of the more prevalent distortions that exist, especially in social media?
Unfortunately, we are seeing anti-Semitism rising around the world, rising in Europe, rising in the United States. And so it's ever more important to fight against it and to find ways to counter anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion and denial, which is a form of anti-Semitism. And, it's a difficult fight. It's one that I've been getting my office more focused on, this question of combating Holocaust distortion and denial. A big part of it is education and teaching both students and adults critical thinking, so that when you see something that does not seem right, ask, where is it from? Because, for example, on social media platforms are a tool for spreading lies, for spreading anti-Semitism, for spreading Holocaust distortion and denial. So teaching people critical thinking to ask, where is this coming from? What is the source? What is it really saying? And is it reliable? that's one big way of helping to counter this. It's also very important for people to speak out when they hear or see something that is anti-Semitic or seems to be distorting the Holocaust. A very recent example of that is some of the COVID-19 yellow stars. A number of protesters who oppose COVID-19 vaccinations have been wearing yellow stars of David and comparing themselves to Jews during World War II. Well, it seems kind of crazy to have to say this, but Jews were forced to wear yellow stars of David so that the Nazis could identify them and round them up and deport them and ultimately murder them. And that is not the same as saying that you cannot go into a restaurant because you chose not to be vaccinated. So creating a false equivalence between the suffering of Jews during World War II, during the Holocaust, and basically a measure like vaccination that is being taken to protect public health, that's a false comparison, and it diminishes the tragedy of the Holocaust and diminishes the suffering of the victims of the Holocaust.
Ms. Germain, thank you very much for this interview. Welcome to Thessaloniki.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you.